everyone, welcome to the first lecture in the series. It's great to have you here. So we're going to start with this quote from John D. Rockefeller, one of the most successful businessmen in history. You may or may not have seen this quote before, but contained in these 4 simple words is a lot of wisdom about the law. Now, I understand this can confuse a lot of people. I get it. How can I own nothing? Why am I working so hard if I'm not going to own anything? But what people don't usually realize is that this is a statement about the law. All right, and this is exactly what we teach in this class, business law. All right, so we're going to break this quote apart in the lecture, and then by the end of it, hopefully you'll be thinking to yourself, wow, I really understand that now. That was way simpler than I expected. All right, so I'm going to start with an anecdote, a small story. One summer, my wife and her friends wanted to use my place in Europe. So I said, sure, go for it. Enjoy yourselves. They did. They had a great time. Then afterwards, one of her friends came and said to me, that place is beautiful. Is it yours? Is it yours? What did she mean by that, right? What does yours mean at law? All right, again, you must learn how law categorizes reality, right? The reality that we're going to be talking about in this lecture is the reality of ownership. All right, so what is ownership at law, right? It's a good question. Ownership at law is not one thing. Ownership at law is a basket of, get that off, is a basket of 3 things. Ownership, title, right? Benefit, economic enjoyment, all right? And finally, control. All right, decisions. That is ownership, guys. Ownership is not one thing. Ownership is a basket. Ownership, the title, what's on the share certificate, who's written on the land register, benefit, economic enjoyment, and control, decisions. All that is ownership, all right? The law lets you unbundle it, right? You can separate it out. Most people assume that these 3 things are the same, right? They are not. People will think, oh, I own it, I must control it, or I control it, I must benefit from it. That is not necessarily true, right? Ownership is not just the title, right? It's a bundle of these 3 things that the law lets you unbundle, all right? So in this class, we're going to do it by going through some specific examples, right? And then we're going to set up a scenario, and then we're going to introduce some external stress event, right? So then we can see how things fall apart when you don't properly understand ownership, benefit, and control. That is ownership. When you walk down the street and you see a building, that's an asset. Think to yourself, who has title? Who has benefit? Who has control, right? The name on the title deed of that building is just part of the legal story. All right, so let's get into it. Start with an example, right? We're going to do an example of, get through this, an oligarch. You are going to really love my drawings today. He's an oligarch, he's happy, he's an oligarch. There we go. And his yacht. Here's his yacht. All right, we're on fire today. Look at his beautiful yacht. He's happy. He's an oligarch. He's a Russian oligarch because who's ever heard of a Mongolian oligarch? All right, this is his yacht, his super yacht. It's parked in Dubai or Montenegro or wherever. Let's analyze ownership between this oligarch and this boat. All right, so we've got ownership, control, and benefit. What is ownership? Ownership is title. Remember, it's whose name's on the title deed for this boat. Is the oligarch going to have title deed in his own name for this boat? Technically it's possible, but I would be very surprised if this super yacht is titled in the name of this oligarch personally. So does he have title? No. Right. Okay. Does he control the boat? Presumably he exercises control over the boat. He tells the captain to sail from Dubai to Montenegro, or he tells the captain what type of petrol to put in, or he may decide to sign a lease contract for 6 months when he's not using it to somebody else. Right. Okay. Does he benefit from the yacht? Presumably he wants to use it. He wants to sail the high seas between exotic islands. He wants to sunbathe on the deck with beautiful women, right? So does he benefit from it? Yes, he has control and he has benefit. If you consider ownership as just the title and you look at the title deed of this boat, you will be led down the garden path, right? Okay, let's assume now that this oligarch came up in the KGB. He's got a very close friend. They're like brothers, effectively, right? Now, this close friend from the KGB, does he own or have title of the boat? No, his name is not going to be on the title deed. It's possible, yes, theoretically, but I would be very surprised if it is. Does he have control? Well, maybe they're so close, they came up in the KGB together, that yeah, he does exercise some control. He can tell the captain where to go. He can tell the captain what petrol to put in. Maybe he can even sign documents that allow the boat to be leased out. So yeah, this KGB friend does have some control. And does he have some benefit? Maybe. Yeah, who knows? Maybe he can also use the yacht on weekends whenever he feels like it. You need to start thinking about assets and ownership in these three terms. That is my point, right? Okay, bye-bye oligarch. All right, so hopefully you're starting to get the idea. Ownership, benefit, and control, right? That's what we're doing. That is ownership. Okay, so, all right, I was actually watching a video with the Tate brothers recently. Don't judge me. It was very entertaining. They were interviewing Tristan Tate, and he was talking about taking a girl home in Romania, and they were walking past a whole bunch of supercars in their garage, really beautiful supercars, and they were walking past. The girl was very impressed. She looked to him and she said, "Wow, these cars, they're so beautiful. Are they yours?" To which he could only reply, or she said, "Which ones are yours?" Now he could only reply, "I don't know. I genuinely don't know." That answer may seem odd to some people, but now you understand why. Were those cars titled in his name? Evidently not. Did he benefit from them? Probably. He could probably use them whenever he wants. He could derive economic enjoyment from them. Right, okay, and did he control them? Presumably, he probably exercised some control over those cars, right? So, ownership, again, benefit and control. It's all that matters. Title, right? Economic enjoyment, power to make decisions. If you're going to get excited about trusts and things like that, you have to understand these three concepts, right? So you can advise your legal professionals properly and run your growing companies. All right. So why does the law separate out these three concepts, right? Well, it does it deliberately because that's really, in reality, what ownership is. It's these three principles. And it does it deliberately to help you, right? Because these three concepts separated out allow flexibility, right? But it also creates risk if you don't understand it properly. So we're going to go through each of them, ownership, benefit, and control, one by one with examples, right? And then we're going to inject a stress event to show you how things can turn sour. All right, let's start with control, right? All right, so we'll do control first. Easy. Okay, so what is control? Do we remember, right? Okay, control is the power to make decisions, okay? So it might be what happens next, or who can hire somebody, or who can fire somebody, or who can sell an asset, or who can sign a document, who can restructure a company, right? That's control, it's decisions, all right? control can exist without ownership and benefit, right? Okay, so you're growing your business. You'll normally start to see control as signatory authority for documents, or voting rights, or management power, contractual decision rights. Those sort of things you'll notice are coming up, right? Okay, now it's control that attracts regulatory attention, and it's control that attracts tax attention, right? Control creates responsibility. Even if you have no title and no benefit, control. All right, so let's do a control case study. It's not a specific case. You can consider it more a pattern of behavior that happens a lot, right? Okay, so we're going to do, all right, so we're going to have a founder, okay, more stickman, there you go, and his brother, all right? You've got two people, all right? And then you've got a company, simple LLC, right? There it is, there's the company. Now, here's the founder, and he owns 100% of this company, okay? Now, he owns it, it's on the title deed, he's on the share certificate, he owns it, he benefits from it, and he controls it in this case. It's his company, right? He's the sole director, so he controls it, he does all the signing, he directs the company, he owns it 100%, and he benefits from it. It's his company, right? His brother, nothing to do with it. He works somewhere else, right? Okay. Then he transfers 100% of the shares, right, to his brother, okay? So now his brother is on the share certificate. He has title, right? Okay. Now, just to remember, we transferred 100% of the shares here, right? Now, you've got to remember, a share transfer is not easy, right? It's a transaction. We'll be dealing with transactions in a later lecture, right? But for now, just accept they went through all the hassle and the share transfer is made. The brother is now on the title. But the founder, his brother, maintains control, right? He stays on the board. He's the sole director. He's signing all the documents. He is making all the decisions. He just transferred the title to his brother. Okay, great. He's got signing authority and his brother is on the title deed. All right, now the founder over here thinks to himself, all right, the shares are no longer in my name. I no longer own it. It's no longer my problem. All right, so let's introduce a stress event. Let's call it divorce. All right, got an angry soon-to-be ex-wife over here. She's sad. Look at her, she's sad. She's about to get divorced. There she is, got crazy hair. The divorce is sending her nuts. Okay, she's over here, she's sad, she's got a dress. Right, she's a woman. Okay, cancel me later. Okay, so an angry future ex-wife, stress event injected into the scenario. Basic example, 4 principles. Got a divorce, right? Okay, so in the divorce, the law is not fooled by the title on the share certificate, right? They're going to look at who can decide, who can delay, who can shape the outcomes of the company, because that's where the economic power actually lives, right? Right, so what's the law going to do then, potentially, right? Well, it might treat the business as controlled property, right? And then what happens? Well, it could treat the company as matrimonial property. What does that mean? Well, it'll suck the company and its value as an asset into the divorce settlement, right? Again, he's not fooling anybody. If you're going to actually transfer the company, transfer ownership, transfer control, transfer benefit, get rid of it, actually do it. The law is not made up of mindless automatons. It is made up of human beings, flesh and blood, skin and bones. You are not going to fool them. They are not robots, right? Okay, so what is ownership? Well, we've been through it. It's the title, right? When you look up the register, it's what you see there. So we've got ownership is title to review. Okay, so ownership is title, all right? So it's going to answer the question, who legally owns the asset in the conventional sense, in the way that most people understand it, all right? Ownership is ultimate exposure, but it's also risk, all right? Now, what do we know? Ownership, benefit, control, they stand separate individually on their own merits. So ownership does not guarantee control. Ownership does not guarantee benefit, right? Okay, ownership can absolutely be passive. It can be constrained. It can be completely hollow. You can think of your brokerage account. Maybe you have a couple of shares of Apple stock in your brokerage account. Do you own Apple? Yes, 100%. You can walk around with your 2 shares of Apple saying, I own Apple. That is legally correct. You own Apple, right? You have all the rights and responsibilities of an owner, a shareholder of Apple. Do you control Apple with your 2 shares in your brokerage account? No, absolutely not. You have no control over Apple. They don't care about, well, they do, but they have a fiduciary responsibility to you. But you have no control. If they have a lot of cash on hand and you need some cash, you want a dividend, they don't care what your opinion is. And do you benefit from Apple? Yes, in a way. You can't force a dividend payout, so you can't access the cash because you have no control. But as the stock price rises, you benefit from it. You can sell the stock price at a profit, for example, right? So you own it? Absolutely. Do you control it? Absolutely not. And do you benefit from it? Yeah, you do, in a way, right? Okay. So let's do another example. We'll have 2 stickmen again. All right, let's do an example with, we've got, right, here we've got 2 founders, right? Okay, 2 founders, all right, and they've started a factory, or they started a few years ago, and they started a factory together, right? And they each have 50% ownership, or title, right, of this company. So they have a factory, they have a company, it's an LLC. This founder owns 50%, this founder owns 50%. They started the company together, they have half of it each, right? So this founder has control, right? Day-to-day control, and he runs and directs the company, right? And this founder is passive, okay? So he's just the owner, right? Okay. So now the assumption of this guy, this owner, is that I own half the company, so I'm safe, right? Okay, so let's introduce some stress event, right? Let's call it a disagreement on strategy, right? So there's a lot of cash inside this company. They've had the last 5 years of accumulated profits. They've been doing really, really well. And this owner here wants a dividend payout. He needs some cash. His wife is spending like crazy. He wants to buy a new sports car. He wants to go on a holiday. He wants to start enjoying the company and its growth and its success, right? Okay, what's the realization he's about to have? I own it, right? But I can't do anything, right? So what is the lesson? Ownership without control is not anything but exposure. It's not power, right? Okay, so another one. Simple examples, guys, to illustrate the point about ownership, benefit, and control, right? So next example we can do, let's go on to benefit. All right, that's enough for ownership. I think you get the idea. So let's go on to benefit, right? Ownership, control, and benefit. All right, so what is benefit? Ownership is title, control is decision-making power, and benefit is economic enjoyment. So you're running your business, you've started to see benefit as dividend distributions from your company, or any kind of distributions, use of the assets of your company, any indirect economic enjoyment. It's economic benefit. Okay, in many ways you can think of benefit as the best one from a human perspective anyway. If you imagine you have a bunch of friends who are really rich and they love you, They let you use their yachts and their houses and their supercars whenever you want. Maybe you end up benefiting and enjoying the assets more than they do. How is that possible? Well, because every weekend they're stuck in meetings with lawyers, doing all the paperwork and all of the contracts and paying all the bills. They've got all the responsibilities of control and ownership, right? So, who would you rather be? That's a question everyone needs to ask themselves. But remember, you are going to die. We are all going to die. Sorry to break it to you. And guess what? All this stuff, the yachts, the supercars, the houses, they stay here in this earthly plane, right? Nobody is taking it with them. So maybe we should change John Rockefeller's quote to own nothing, benefit from everything. All right, so let's have a look. Let's ask ourselves some good legal questions. Is it possible to benefit from something without controlling it? Yes, it is possible to benefit something without controlling it. What you have just described is actually basically a trust. Now, this often surprises people later, but it is possible, in theory, to be the beneficiary of a big fat trust, right? And still be broke and living on the street. Maybe you have a friend who's a trust fund baby and you're super jealous of this trust fund baby because their parents made a fortune. And who's not jealous of a trust fund baby, right? This is meaningless without more details around what? That's right, control. All right. Why is it meaningless? Because all you know about this trust fund baby is right. What do you know? Benefit, right? Your trust fund baby, you know, benefit. You don't know anything about control and you don't know anything about title, right? So benefit is only 1/3 of the story, all right? Let's do a benefit case study, all right? What can we do for a benefit case study? I think we will illustrate how you can own a company, majority of the company, all right? How you can exercise some meaningful control at some level, right? And how you can still not benefit in any practical way. I think that's going to surprise a lot of people to hear that. So we'll show you how that's possible. You can own 90% of this company, right? You can have some control at some management level, right? But it is still possible then to not benefit. When you own a majority, you have some control. You can still not benefit in meaningful ways that help you day to day, right? All right, so in our example, we'll have a successful business, right? Revenue's up, profits are up, valuation is up, all right? So you're a founder, you're over here, you're thinking to yourself, awesome, valuation's up, profits up, right? Revenue's up, everything's going great, okay? Why am I still not getting paid? I need some cash, yo. My wife is spending like crazy. All right, so maybe a few years ago, you took some erroneous legal advice from some influencer on YouTube and you appointed a professional board to your successful company. So now you've got a professional board and they have a meaningful amount of control over what? Over the cash of the company, right? Okay, and what do they want to do? Well, they want to reinvest the cash. They want to do capital expenditure. They want to expand the business, right? What is the realization that you're going to have, right? Well, I own the shares. I have title to 90% of the shares, but I don't control the cash, right? So in this example, the board's control of the cash comes from the governance documents of the company, the shareholder agreements, or the articles of association. Maybe their control also comes from the company law of the country. The point is that you can definitely own an overwhelming majority of a company. You can definitely have some control of that company, some meaningful control even, and you can definitely not have very much economic enjoyment in ways that help you day to day. So yes, you as a shareholder own the company. You're on the share certificate. But if the board never votes to distribute the dividends, right, then what is ownership? It's theoretical when it comes to cash. It's a ledger entry somewhere, right? So the shareholder owns the increase in the share price, right? But the board decides if the cash is released. All right, so can you have control without ownership? Yes, of course, it is possible to have control without ownership. Very simple example. You can think of a CEO with a big fat salary package and 0% ownership of the company. All right, managers, directors, trustees, they often have control without owning, right? Okay, so can you have, let's say, can you have title ownership without benefit, right? Yeah, of course. OBC, they all stand on their own. So people generally build structures and they assume alignment, but then misalignment only becomes visible when you introduce some stress event. That is the point of these examples, as simple as they are. All right, so most legal disasters are not illegal acts. They're exposed, incorrect assumptions around ownership, control, and benefit. People are always so worried about doing something illegal when they start in business. What they really should be worried about is making stupid assumptions around ownership, benefit, and control, especially when setting things up. All right, so the point of this lecture series is to get you asking better questions about business and the law. So don't ask, what structure should I use? It's erroneous. Instead, you should ask, who should control, who should own, and who should benefit now and into the future? Once you can answer that, you're ready to start looking at things like trusts. Not before. What happens if incentives change? What happens if relationships change? What happens if the rules change? These are the questions that matter to the law. Companies, trusts, foundations are only tools. They are not answers in themselves. They express decisions already made by you. So, our final thought on business law and ownership. If you take nothing else away from this lecture, then let it be this. Separate control, ownership, and benefit. Do it properly. Do it deliberately. Every asset, every entity has these three elements. It is these three elements that are ownership. They are all that matter.